Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys tuning in for today's video. And today, guys, we have an information-packed video. This is one of those deals. It's not a flashy video. It's not something that gets your attention, but this is going to definitely help you catch a lot of fish because we're going to be talking about the importance of casting angles. Casting angles are everything when it comes to generating strikes from a lot of different lure categories. So I'm going to give you guys a good foundational approach on what you need to really think about and how do you need to, think about your cast before you make it, because it definitely makes a difference between catching a bunch of fish and not catching many at all. Also, guys, quick invitation. I'd just like to invite everybody to please hit that subscribe button here at Advanced Bass Fishing. That'd be much appreciated. And also, guys, if you're looking to stock up on your spring fishing tackle, Tackle Warehouse has got a big spring sale going on right now. I'll put my Tackle Warehouse link in the description. If you guys would use and bookmark that link for all your tackle purchases, that's a good way to support Advanced Bass Fishing and give something back to the channel. So a big thank you to me, from me and my family, for everybody who's been doing that. Okay, one of the things I learned many years ago from fishing with some of the pros like, Larry Nixon and Hank Parker and Rick Clunn, is they were masters at understanding the importance of casting angles on targets. Here is the thing about it, guys. Casting angles, when it comes to how you cast your lure at a target. Now, that target could be anything. It could be a drop-off. It could be a brush pile. It could be a lay-down tree. It could be a log in the water. It could be the edge of a grass bed. It could be whatever. The way that you make your cast around a piece of cover, even if that cover is not visible, it determines a lot if you're ever going to get a bite or not, because it's one of those factors that triggers a bass into biting. And a lot of times we don't know why that is. It's just the way the fish are positioned on that structure. And it's them reading the personality as far as, what is actually going to make them bite. So let me use it. I'll give you guys several examples what I'm talking about here. In the 1998 Bassmaster Classic, I finished third in that tournament. I would have won the tournament. I lost two big fish that would cost me the tournament. But the way that I was catching my fish in that tournament is I was casting a crankbait and flipping a grub around logs that were in the water on these flats. So say, for example, you'd be in a shallow flat that was like 3 to 4 foot deep, and floods over the course of the year had brought in a bunch of logs and just put these logs on the flat. So you might have one log that was sort of like a telephone pole in the water in 3 foot of water just sitting there. The way that I figured out catching these fish is like you could make 2 or 3 casts with a crankbait down the side of those logs and you'd never get a bite. But I figured out that bass were living on almost every one of those logs, and I just had to trigger those fish into biting from the right casting angle. So what I would do is I would cast down the side of each log 3 or 4 times, and then I'd go around to the other side of the log and I'd cast from an opposite direction, and then I'd get around from a different side and I'd cast over the top of the log. And I caught fish a lot of different ways with it. Some of the fish I caught were coming down the side of the log. Some of them were caught coming down the opposite side of it. Some were caught crawling over the top of it. But it took multiple casts to do that. And if I would just make 1 or 2 casts down the best looking part of it, I would never get a bite. And I figured out in that particular tournament that the angle that I was casting from had to do a lot with the current, the direction the current was coming from, the sunlight angle, which changed a lot, and it required repeated casts. Now, that's a pretty basic high-level tip as far as saturating a target with casts and making a lot of different presentations with it. But what I want to talk about specifically in the video today is how to determine which angle to cast from and how to try to cast and catch fish the first 3 or 4 casts without having to make 30 or 40 casts to the same piece of cover. So here's some factors that really contribute to casting angles and what you need to be aware of. Number 1 is current. Current can position fish and require you, to cast at a certain angle. Depending upon the intensity of the current, sometimes a light current will put them on one piece of the cover, sometimes a heavier current the other. Wind direction will do the same thing. The direction of the wind, the way it's hitting a piece of cover will require a different casting angle. sunlight angle, because sunlight is constantly changing and throwing shade and losing shade throughout the day. All of this requires different casting angles. Ultimately, there's no like right reason with that. There's no right. I can't say you can't say like, Randy, okay, that we got a little bit of a current here and the sun is coming out and throwing a little bit of shade off this one side and the wind's coming for this direction. I can't tell you where you need to cast, because the fish, the way they're positioned on that piece of cover, that's the mystery that we don't understand. And a lot of that casting angle that takes place, you see what's above the water for the most part, but you don't really see what is underneath the water in terms of that fish sitting there, because there may be some objects under the water that you simply can't see, that the fish are down there that cause them to position in a certain way. And in other times that the aggressiveness or the inactivity of the fish will cause them to position differently on certain pieces of cover. So the casting angle that you have to determine is on a day-by-day basis, and it's basically experimental. So one of the things that you have to incorporate with casting angle is your boat positioning, because your boat positioning is going to determine the angle that you cast out. So best thing that I can give you guys with this, the best tip is like your first 10 casts are your high percentage cast, and that's the one that's usually going to generate the strike. So some of the things that will not work every time, but works a lot of the times, if you make your cast and the casting angle that you're coming at allows your bait to come past a piece of cover for the longest period of time, and it's coming past that piece of cover, in the shade is another big factor, and it's coming across that piece of cover with the wind blowing on it, those are big, high percentage type casts to make. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to work every time. That's why multiple presentations are required. One of the things that I think a lot of people don't do enough in bass fishing is they don't make enough casts on one piece of cover before moving on. If you have a prime piece of cover that looks really good, let's say, for example, you've got a nice big laydown tree that's sitting on a point next to deep water. There's going to be a bass living on that tree. There's bass living on that tree. You have to come across at that piece of cover at the right angle with your boat and the right casting angle. Now, sometimes that casting angle may be on the outside perimeter of the tree. Sometimes it may be coming across the front of it. Sometimes it's in the middle of it. Sometimes it may be, instead of like you putting your boat on the end of the tree casting to the bank, you may want to put your boat against the bank and cast out to deep water. This is one of the most common things that I do in deep water fishing. Let's say, for example, I'm fishing a deep point and there's a drop off on that deep point. 99% of the people will put their boat in deep water and cast into shallow water to fish that deep point. A lot of times, if you drag your lure uphill, if you get your boat in shallow water and cast it to deeper water and bring that lure uphill, that's a casting angle that you're going to generate a strike that fish simply don't see very much. And that's another thing to remember. Try to think in terms of the way most people cast to a piece of cover. So if you're coming up on a good target, let's say there's a nice boat dock in front of you that you're coming up on, or you see a nice, lily pad point or a little grass bed or a stump in the water, something like that. Try to think in your mind, okay, how do most people come up on these pieces of cover? And the number one thing that you have to remember is most fishermen are a little bit lazy. So they don't want to take the time to position their boat or get their boat in a position that requires effort. So they're going to approach that particular piece of cover from the perspective that requires the least effort to them. Think about that all the time. And when you approach that piece of cover, try to look at that cover and say, how is somebody not going to cast around this? I want to put my boat in the position that requires a little bit more effort and that most people don't take the time to do. And that makes a big difference, guys, especially on a heavily pressured lake, is try and come past those piece of targets at different angles. It all goes back to having a different approach, whether it be a different lure color, a different profile, a different retrieve and cadence, a different casting angle, a different boat positioning angle. All those things factor in it together. So another thing that can help you with it is fish that you catch can point you in the right direction. anytime that you catch a fish, one of the things you should do is take a second and just think about how your bait was coming past that target to generate that strike. And then another thing that you can do with it is when you unhook the fish, look very closely to where the hook is positioned in the mouth of that fish, because that will tell you the position and the direction that a fish attacked your lure from. And that can also add some information to it where you can use that to make your next cast with it. But overall, guys, pay close attention to casting angles, make multiple presentations. Not only make multiple presentations, but make multiple presentations with different lures. Just because you throw a spinnerbait or a crankbait down the side of a log and don't catch a fish, that doesn't mean that you can't pitch a jig or a Texas rig or something in there and catch that fish. Try to make different presentations with different angles, with different lures, different colors, and that's what maximizes your fishing. That's what makes some people catch 3 fish in a day and other people catch 20 fish in a day, is little simple things like that. So anyway, I hope it helps out, guys, and we'll talk later.